big welcome to everyone joining us on this beautiful fall afternoon on Florida's Space Coast. You are looking live at a Falcon 9 rocket standing on Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. SpaceX is counting down to the launch of the Starlink 10-8 mission. Right now, liftoff is scheduled for the opening of today's launch window at 5:47 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 21:47 UTC for our viewers around the world. I'm Stephen Young, and I'll be providing commentary for our coverage of the countdown today. Will Robinson-Smith has the weekend off. We're broadcasting from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Be sure to follow the team on social media and keep up with their launch photography and reporting. Will Robinson-Smith will be back on commentary duty for the next launch. Photographer Adam Bernstein will be tracking the rocket with our cameras and doing some still photography. Michael Kane is also joining us in the field to catch more views of the rocket with his cameras. We also have support of our launch coverage today with tracking footage from our friends Pete Carson with Max Q Productions, as well as Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images. Spaceflight Now is powered by our viewers and members. We can't do this coverage without your support. Please hit the like button and click subscribe so you get notifications when new videos are posted and you won't miss any of our live streams. Also, please share this stream. It helps more people find this live coverage and everything else going on with our channel. If you'd like to help improve and expand our coverage of the space program, we would love it if you would consider making a donation through YouTube's Super Chat feature or by becoming a member of our YouTube channel. Membership grants you access to our special members-only videos, as well as discounts for our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com. A huge thank you to everyone who's made a contribution to help fund our coverage. We're now about 20 minutes away from the point at which the start of propellant load will begin for today's launch. Prior to that, the launch director will give their go for the start of that loading of propellants. SpaceX is running the countdown from its Launch Control Center, housed inside the Hangar X facility, which is located about 6 miles west of the pad. This building is also where Falcon boosters are refurbished and prepared for flight. Today's launch will also be supported by teams at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Again, tonight's launch is targeting liftoff at 5:47 p.m. Eastern Time. If needed, SpaceX has backup opportunities that extend to 9:47 p.m. It can opt to push back the launch as long as they haven't started fueling the Falcon 9 rocket. If they are unable to launch today for whatever reason, they do have another launch window on Sunday, October 27th. That opens at 5:24 p.m. Eastern. The weather is fairly ideal for launch this morning. The 45th Weather Squadron forecast 90% chances of favorable conditions at liftoff. The only watch item is for the cumulus cloud roll. Weather officers tend to always include cumulus cloud as a concern, just as they very rarely give a 100% chance of successful, good weather for a successful liftoff. If they need to push back the launch 24 hours, there's also a 90% favorable weather forecast for tomorrow's launch window. But for that window, they're also tracking the thick cloud roll. Let's take a look at the countdown timeline for today's Starlink mission. Around T-minus 38 minutes, the launch director will report the results of their go, no-go poll. That poll is taken electronically in the Launch Control Center at Hangar X. If a go is given, propellant load will start at T-minus 35 minutes. That process begins with the loading of kerosene on the first and second stages, along with liquid oxygen for the first stage. With 30 minutes on the clock, cryogenic Helium is loaded into carbon fiber pressure vessels located inside the rocket's liquid oxygen tanks. The helium plays an important role pressurizing the rocket's tanks as the propellants are consumed. This keeps liquid oxygen and kerosene flowing into the Merlin engines. The helium load starts with the first stage and continues with the second stage 4 minutes later. Loading of kerosene aboard the second stage should wrap up at about the T-minus 23-minute mark. The loading of kerosene, or RP1, into the much larger first stage fuel tank will continue. The next major event is the start of the strong-back chill-down process. The strong-back structure sits alongside the rocket on the launch pad. In addition to supporting the vehicle, it serves as the conduit for propellant lines, air conditioning, and power for both the rocket's second stage and the payload fairing. We can see this chill-down process in the form of the so-called big vent. A large cloud of vapor will be seen as the liquid oxygen lines are cooled before the next major milestone in the countdown. That comes at T-minus 16 minutes, when it's the turn of liquid oxygen to start flowing through those strong-back lines into the second stage. At T-minus 7 minutes, the chill-down of the 9 Merlin first-stage engines will get underway. This involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. This will protect those engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes prior to launch, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong-back begin to retract from the Falcon 9 rocket. It'll recline to an angle of about 1.5 degrees, leaning back ever so slightly from the Falcon 9. It will stay there until liftoff, when the strong-back will pull away in a more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. About 3 minutes before liftoff, the first stage liquid oxygen tank should be full. Then around 2 minutes before launch, liquid oxygen loading should be complete on the second stage. At that point, the Falcon 9 will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellants. In the final 60 seconds of the countdown, the control of the rocket will be handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks will be brought up to flight pressure, and the SpaceX launch director will give their final go for launch. The engine ignition command will be issued at T-minus 3 seconds. If all 9 Merlin 1D engines ignite and are healthy, the flight computer will command the hold-down clamps to release the Falcon 9 for liftoff at T0. Just taking a quick look at the chat, I want to welcome Richard A. and Jack's K9 Tangles and Douglas Coe as pad leaders at the...
Se tem Nescau, tem cálcio, tem mais esporte.
Cada chute, cada jarda conquistada, cada passo te leva mais perto dos seus sonhos. E agora, a cada R$200 em compras com seu Visa cadastrado, você tem a chance de ficar mais perto do sonho de assistir ao Super Bowl 59.
the in our membership program. Also, appreciate the support from Jeff Hansen with a $5 super chat. It's always a little tricky trying to do commentary and perform all the behind-the-scenes switching of video. So always happy to fill in for Will, but I hope you will bear with me while I perform double duty here for the launch this afternoon.
Video feeds.
Let's talk a little bit about the payload for today's mission. This is a file photo of what the standard Starlink V2 mini satellites look like when they're stacked in the launch configuration. This photo was taken last year before a previous Starlink launch. Tonight will be the 69th launch of these V2 minis in 2024 and the 132nd launch of this particular model of Starlink satellites to date. Each of those satellites, which you can see are flat packed, one on top of each other, weigh about 1,760 pounds or 800 kilograms. After the twin solar panels unfurl, the spacecraft have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They are equipped with argon hole thrusters for in-orbit maneuvers and were built at a SpaceX facility in Redmond, Washington, near Seattle. To date, SpaceX hasn't published a rendering or photo of an entire V2 mini Starlink satellite in its operating configuration. But thanks to Black Sky and HEO, we do have this image recently released of a V2 mini in orbit. This was taken by another satellite orbiting above the Starlink V2 mini. You can clearly see the 2 solar panels extending from the main body of the spacecraft. After launch, the Falcon 9's upper stage will deliver the satellites to about 180 miles in altitude with an inclination of 53 degrees to the equator. They'll use their ion thrusters over the coming weeks and months to raise their altitude to their operational orbit. Here's a view of what one of those thrusters look like in action. These argon hole thrusters produce about 2.4 times the amount of thrust that the krypton thrusters used by older Starlink satellites generated. To date, SpaceX has launched a total of 7,148 Starlink satellites. As of yesterday, more than 6,494 of those were still in orbit. That's according to statistics compiled by Jonathan McDowell, an astronomer and spaceflight expert who tracks all these launches. Not all of those satellites in orbit have reached their operational positions, and some are being decommissioned and will re-enter the atmosphere. In late September, SpaceX announced there are currently more than 4 million Starlink internet customers around the world. So by this point in the countdown, we would have expected the launch director to have given their go for the start of propellant load. We sometimes receive an update from SpaceX at this point in the countdown via a social media post on X, formerly known as Twitter. Other times we just have to wait and see if we can see the start of that process, which becomes visible by the formation of frost and vapor around the bottom of the first stage liquid oxygen tank. That start of propellant load is due to get underway in less than a minute if everything is on track for a liftoff at 5:47 p.m. At this point, we've not heard anything to suggest otherwise, but we'll eagerly await the word from SpaceX or the sight of that frost and vapor. So we have just received confirmation from SpaceX that propellants are flowing aboard the Falcon 9 ahead of the planned 5:47 p.m. liftoff. They say they are tracking no weather or technical blockers to liftoff. So the ground computers are now managing that automatic sequence to pump propellants aboard the Falcon 9 rocket. 3 of the 4 propellant tanks on the rocket are being loaded at this point. Those are the kerosene tanks on the first and second stages and the liquid oxygen tank on the first stage. The fuel is a highly refined rocket-grade kerosene known as Rocket Propellant 1, or RP1 for short. The oxidizer used by the Falcon 9's Merlin engines is a super-chilled liquid oxygen. By densifying the oxygen, SpaceX can pack in more propellants and gain more performance than is possible with standard liquid oxygen. And if you look towards the base of the Falcon 9, you'd start to see a white band forming around the liquid oxygen tank that is located there. As that super cold propellant is pumped aboard the Falcon 9, it chills down the fuselage of the rocket, and as the warm, humid Florida air comes into contact with that, the water vapor in the air forms frost and those wispy vapors that wrap around the outside of the rocket. You can see that white band is starting to creep its way up the outside of the rocket. That will form a handy fuel gauge for us, measuring how much liquid oxygen is in the tank. When it reaches the top of the first stage, we'll know that that tank is fully loaded. Want to give a big thank you to the more than 3,000 people joining us for our coverage today. If you haven't done so already, please hit the like button, and you might also want to hit subscribe so you never miss one of our launch broadcasts.
Então tá.
Empréstimo para reformar? Então tá.
Novo Clube Social Snack. Assado, crocante e intensamente temperado. Experimente.
This view of the Falcon 9 from across the Indian River Lagoon comes from our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs. Gives us a different perspective on the Falcon 9 vehicle. The crew access arm at Space Launch Complex 40, clearly visible there, attached to the black tower. Just to recap, at this stage in the countdown, SpaceX is loading the RP-1 kerosene fuel aboard both the first and second stages, and liquid oxygen into the first stage. With the start of propellant load, SpaceX is locked into the 5:47 p.m. T0 liftoff time. Because of the nature of the superchill densified propellants, there is not an option to recycle the countdown and attempt another liftoff. And with now less than 26 minutes to the launch of this Falcon 9, cryogenic helium is being loaded into the storage tanks on the second stage. Once again, that helium is a very important part of the countdown process, getting it aboard so that the tanks can be pressurized during flight to keep the propellants flowing into the Merlin engines. This will be the 19th flight of this particular booster with the tail number B1069. Let's take a look at its flight history. It first launched on December 21st, 2021. It was carrying supplies to the International Space Station on the Cargo Dragon CRS-24 mission. That was followed on August 28th, 2022 by the first launch for this booster of a Starlink mission. That was the Starlink 4-23 flight. Its third flight was on October 15th, 2022, when it launched the Hotbird 13F satellite. A fourth launch carried satellites for OneWeb, a batch of satellites on their 15th launch. Launch number 5 came on February 2nd, 2023. That was the Starlink 5-3 mission. Next came a launch for Luxembourg company SES. The SES 18 and 19 satellites launched on the 17th of March last year. From that point on, everything has been Starlink for this particular booster. 5-6, 5-12, 6-9, 6-19, 6-28, 6-36, 6-39, 6-47, 6-57, 10-1, 10-9, and most recently 10-18 on August 31st. One measure of the number of flights this booster has under its belt is the amount of soot, which is in clear contrast to the white frost as the propellant loading process goes underway. Well, not yet visible. We're getting close to the start of the strung back chill down process and the so-called big vent. That process should be getting underway in about 40 seconds from now. You see the big vent continuing now. This process chilling down the lines leading to the second stage. It will pave the way for the start of the liquid oxygen loading into the upper stage of the Falcon 9. Without this process, the super cold liquid oxygen would come into contact with the warm pipes, and that would generate some thermal shock and some bubbles and gas within the propellant, which is not desirable. So this process chills down those lines so that that super cold propellant reaches the tank without warming up. A big thank you to Chuck Close for a $25 super chat. Thank you very much. Appreciate your support. We couldn't do this coverage without the support of all of you out there. If you're not able to make a contribution, then just hitting the like button really helps us out. T-minus 16 minutes and 55 seconds and counting. This process of chilling the strong back propellant lines will be wrapping up shortly. You can see the venting starting to taper out. So if everything is going according to plan, in the next 30 seconds, SpaceX should start loading liquid oxygen aboard the second stage of the Falcon 9. It's continuing to load liquid oxygen on the first stage. The process of loading kerosene into the second stage was wrapped up about 8 minutes ago, and the loading of kerosene into the first stage has about another 10 minutes till that process wraps up. So with less than 16 minutes on the clock, the Falcon 9 should be receiving liquid oxygen into its second stage. Let's take a look at the trajectory for this Starlink 10-8 mission.
A nova fórmula de Vanish com Oxy Accelerator tira as manchas mais difíceis, deixa o branco mais branco e evita o amarelamento.
The Falcon 9 will lift off from the pad at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It will fly in a northeasterly trajectory heading offshore along the east coast of the United States. Following stage separation, the first stage will land on one of SpaceX's 3 drone ships. The one on deck today is called Just Read the Instructions. This was the second drone ship to bear the name Just Read the Instructions, and it entered service with its first landing in January 2016. The drone ship is stationed about 385 miles downrange in the Atlantic Ocean. That's about 250 miles east of Charleston, South Carolina. The upper stage will continue on with the Starlink satellites. They will be deployed a little over an hour into the flight. The fairing halves will jettison a bit further downrange of where the booster touches down. Those fairings are gently parachuted down to the ocean, where they are picked up by a SpaceX recovery ship. In this case, they're using Bob, which is named after the former NASA astronaut Bob Behnken, who flew aboard the Dragon Demo 2 mission in May 2020. By retrieving those fairings, SpaceX estimates it saves about $6 million. It's been a beautiful day here in Central Florida, as you can see from this wide shot looking over the turn basin here at the Kennedy Space Center press site. Just a little bit of a breeze, as you can tell by the flag. That flag actually flying again after the flagpole here was damaged during the passage of Hurricane Milton. Now less than 10 minutes to the launch of the Falcon 9. Liftoff remains scheduled for 5:47. You can see in our close-up view there's now wisps of vapor around the second stage as that tank fills with liquid oxygen. Let's take a closer look at the Falcon 9 vehicle. It stands 70 meters or 229 feet tall and has a diameter of 3.6 meters or 12 feet. The bottom 2/3 of the rocket is the first stage. Today's first stage booster has flown 18 times before and has the tail number 1069. At the base of the first stage are the 9 Merlin 1D engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen to produce 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are the black carbon fiber landing legs that will be used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Above the first stage is the interstage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core surrounded by carbon fiber. In the inset image, you can also see the deployable titanium grid fins. They provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it falls through the atmosphere. At the top of the first stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. At first stage engine cutoff, high pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure there is a clean separation between the 2 stages. The second stage nozzle is housed inside the interstage adapter until stage separation. The upper stage is powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine or MVAC engine. It is equipped with a large nozzle optimized for burns in the vacuum of space. It produces more than 200,000 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice on today's flight to place the 23 Starlink satellites into orbit. The MVAC engine burns the same propellant mix as the first stage. It will ignite a third time after the deployment of the Starlink satellites. That will be a deorbit burn to drive the upper stage back into the atmosphere, where it will burn up. That eliminates the risk of any unnecessary space debris on this mission. At the very top of the rocket is the payload fairing containing the 22 Starlink satellites. It's made of a carbon composite material and is 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall and 5.2 meters, 17.1 feet in diameter. We've reached the point in the countdown where the chill down of the Merlin engines should be underway. Also, the loading of kerosene aboard the first stage of the vehicle should have been completed. In a few moments, we should be receiving countdown audio from SpaceX, and we'll pipe that in as soon as we get it. Now less than 5 minutes to the launch of the Falcon 9 and 22 Starlink satellites.
Thanks for pressing for strongback retract.
There we hear the first call from Launch Control. They're pressurizing the tanks on the Falcon 9 before they retract the strongback, which has provided a little bit of support by pressurizing those tanks. They become a little rigid and help keep the Falcon 9 stable on the launch pad.
Strongback retract is starting.
There we have word that that strongback retract is now underway. You can see the clamp arms that are located just between the payload fairing and the second stage are opening up, and the strong back structure will start to move away. The SpaceX video comes to us with a little bit of a delay, around about 10 seconds. You'll notice there's a difference between our countdown clock, which is in real time, and the SpaceX clock, which is delayed by, as I said, about 10 seconds. The strong back retracts to an angle of about 1.5 degrees at this point, and will retract further at the moment of liftoff. You can clearly see the gap now has opened up between the rocket and the strong back. With less than 3 minutes to go, the rocket's autonomous destruct system is being armed, and liquid oxygen topping will be terminated.
Stage 1 LOX float is complete.
And there we hear word that the loading of liquid oxygen on the first stage has wrapped up. T-minus 2 minutes.
Stage 2 LOX float is complete.
The second stage liquid oxygen tank is now full. The Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellants. We're seeing some venting at the launch pad as SpaceX purges the strong back propellant lines prior to launch. That will prevent the ignition of any of the liquid oxygen that remains in those umbilicals.
Ground gas closeouts.
You heard the call there for the ground gas closeouts. That's that venting that I just mentioned. We're now approaching the final minute of the countdown. The Falcon 9's onboard computers will take control, and the stages will be pressurized for flight. Less than a minute to go.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
There we have confirmation. The onboard computers have control. Next up, we should get the final go from the launch director.
LD, go for launch.
And there we have it. The launch director has given their go for launch. Less than 30 seconds. $15, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition.
Roupa errada, né? Melhor comer sneakers.
Novo Nativa Spa Cereja Rouge. Você comprovadamente mais irresistível. Nativa Spa é o boticário.
And liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 with 22 Starlink satellites. And the Falcon 9 has cleared the towers. Falcon 9 is now rolling onto a northeasterly trajectory. Let's listen in to the roar of the Falcon 9's Merlin engines. 1 minute into flight. Falcon 9 has passed the period of maximum dynamic pressure, now traveling faster than the speed of sound. Coming up on the separation of the first and second stages. Chill down of the Merlin vacuum engine is underway. There we see the burnout of the 9 Merlin first stage engines. And ignition on the second stage. We'll see that process happen with that little bit of delay on the SpaceX broadcast. Beautiful view on the right-hand side of your screen at the Falcon 9 second stage roaring away from the east coast of Florida. The view coming to you on the left side of the screen is from Pete Carstens. You can see the separation of the fairing in his video. We'll see that in the SpaceX feed. There's a view of the Starlink satellites inside that fairing. Beautiful shots showing those fairing halves tumbling away from the second stage. You can also see the first stage with its cold gas thrusters firing. So 4 objects there Pete is tracking. The payload fairing halves, the second stage, and the first stage. He's managing to keep an eye on that first stage. I think that's one of the fairings at the top of the box there. The Falcon 9 first stage continues to climb at this point, even though the engines are shut off. Its forward velocity is keeping it on an upward trajectory. It's approaching 114 kilometers in altitude. It seems to be slowing down, so it may be reaching the high point. Pete doing a fantastic job here, keeping that first stage in view. Remember, that stage is moving away from us, so this is quite a feat to still be able to see it at this point. It is starting to begin its slow descent. It's reached its high point now at 111 kilometers. Starting to pick up speed, though, as the pull of gravity starts to bring it back to Earth. That's the reason that it will soon be performing a entry burn to avoid burning up in the atmosphere, as it is now traveling at close to 7,400 kilometers an hour. Now at an altitude of less than 100 kilometers, which is considered to be the threshold of space. And it may be that it has disappeared behind some cloud now from Pete's camera view.
Both vehicles continue to follow a nominal trajectory.
Stage 1 FTS has saved.
Stage 1 entry burn startup. Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
There we have conclusion of the entry burn. You can see the speed of the rocket now plummeting. Now at an altitude of about 16 kilometers. Meanwhile, the second stage burn continues. You can see that Merlin vacuum engine glowing red hot.
Stage 1 transonic.
First stage now traveling less than the speed of sound. See the ocean coming into view. Should get the drone ship coming into the frame there on the left-hand side of your screen. First stage now traveling less than the speed of sound.
Stage 1 landing burn.
We see ignition of a single Merlin engine for this landing burn. Drone ship
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
coming into view.
Stage 1 landing leg deployed.
And touchdown.
Stage 1 landing confirmed.
Falcon 9 booster 1069 on the deck of the drone ship, completing its 19th mission. The second stage is continuing to climb, nearing the end of its burn. Let's listen in for that call.
Back shutdown.
There we have it. That Merlin vacuum engines completed its
Stage
first
2
burn.
FPS has saved.
SpaceX is ending its coverage of the launch. The upper stage is now in a coast phase. That coast phase will last about 46 minutes before there's a very short 2-second burn of the second stage engine that will circularize the orbit, and if that all goes according to plan, an hour, 3 minutes and 44 seconds after launch, the Starlink satellites will be deployed. So you can see there the site of the empty launch pad here at the Cape. Another successful climb to orbit, although the mission itself is not over till that burn of the second stage and separation of the satellites. Just returning to the chat, wanted to thank people who've contributed to our coverage today. Having a little trouble reading the username here. But sulfur for, unfortunately it's truncated on my screen. Thank you for your support, it's much appreciated. Mitchell Wilbur, thank you for your $20 super chat. Stephen Bybee, thank you for $2 super chat, and Lloyd Green, thank you also for a $2 super chat. We really appreciate everyone's support, and if you're not able to make a donation through the super chat, please just hit the like button. That really does help us out. So before we wrap up our coverage this evening, let's take a look at the latest stats for this particular mission. This was the 19th flight of Booster 1069. That booster which...
Se tem Nescau, tem cálcio, tem mais esporte.
Novo Peugeot 2008.
Made its debut with a space station resupply mission back in December 2021, flying for a 19th time today. It was the 386th Falcon 9 launch in total. The 101st Falcon 9 launch of this year. Also the 331st Falcon booster reflight. The 103rd SpaceX orbital launch of 2024. That includes 2 Falcon Heavy rockets. We're not counting the flights of the Starship vehicle in that total, as those flights were technically suborbital. One interesting way of measuring SpaceX's launch pace is to look at the number of launches that have occurred in the last 365 days. So on that metric, SpaceX has chalked up its 123rd orbital launch in the last 365 days. It had hoped to reach 140 odd missions this year. It's not clear they're going to make it, but they certainly have picked up the pace in the last month. They had faced a number of groundings from the FAA that slowed things down over the summer. There's also been a lot of weather issues with the stormy conditions that we typically see in the summer here in Florida, but also the passage of 2 hurricanes and tropical storms that have also whipped up the ocean and affected the recovery weather. This was the 212th SpaceX launch from Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, and the 267th overall launch from that pad. And if we take a look at the yearly Falcon family launch record, you can see the statistic for 2024 is continuing the upward curve on that graph with the 103 launches by Falcon 9s and Falcon Heavies so far this year. Turning to the recovery stats, this was the 95th landing on the drone ship. Just read the instructions. Was the 282nd SpaceX drone ship landing overall, and the 359th SpaceX booster landing in total. Taking a look at the wider space industry, it was the 73rd launch from Florida's Space Coast. More launches than the previous year. It was the 110th orbital launch from U.S. soil and the 120th orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company. That's including the flights of Rocket Lab from its launch site in New Zealand. It was the 196th orbital launch attempt globally, and of those launches there were 6 launch failures. So as we prepare to wrap up our coverage, just a few thanks to some last-minute super chats here. One from Patty Chichel for $5, and another from not exactly sure how to pronounce your name, but GH Taboma for a $2 super chat, thanking us for our coverage. So much appreciated. We really appreciate all the support you're offering us today. Also want to give a big thanks to our moderators today who've been keeping everything, as Will likes to say, kosher in the chat. Big thanks to Callistia Lee, Mark Otto, and Astro Joe. Hopefully I've caught everyone who was helping out with the moderation today. But thank you for really helping to keep our coverage top-notch and keeping the chat on topic. Also want to give a big thank you to Adam Bernstein, who was tracking the launch today, and Michael Kane, who was out shooting still photography. And stay tuned to Spaceflight Now's X account and to their accounts for some launch photography. You can see their handles there on X. If you haven't done so already, make sure you give the team a follow, and be sure to follow the main Spaceflight Now account as well. Also, a big thanks to Pete Carstens of MaxQ Productions and Chuck and Jen Briggs of C&J Images for their work tonight, tracking the launch as it departed the Space Coast. Fantastic work today in the, we were fortunately granted clear skies, which really makes our job a lot easier, but these guys do a fantastic job keeping the rocket in the frame. It's not as easy as you would think. And before we sign off, one more super chat from Nick Gouge for its $10 super chat. Thank you for your support, Nick. So with that, I'll wish you a good night. We'll hopefully see you back here very soon. The launch schedule here is continuing apace to the end of the month, and we could have 3 more Starlink missions coming up before Halloween. The next one coming up on 2 more Starlinks before Halloween. I'm getting ahead of myself here. We should have a launch from Vandenberg on the 29th, and another Starlink from here at the Cape on the 30th. The next launch from Pad 39A is the Cargo Dragon mission, the CRS-31 flight. And before I sign off, big thank you to KH for a $10 super chat. So with that, I wish you a very good night. Thank you for joining us. We'll We'll see you for the next one.